Walk down the main street of Maldon, Victoria, and you might wonder if someone forgot to tell this town that the Beatles broke up, that colour television exists, or that the space age ever happened. The milk bar still serves milkshakes in chrome-topped stools, worn smooth by 3 generations of customers. The general store stocks the same brands your grandparents bought, displayed in wooden bins that creak when you open them. The theatre marquee advertises films using painted letters on boards, just like it did 70 years ago. The same wooden ladder leaning against the same brick wall. But here's what makes this strange. What separates these places from every heritage village across Australia? These aren't recreations. This isn't a theme park built to satisfy tourist nostalgia or cash in on retro trends. These are real towns where real people live, work, and raise families in buildings that haven't changed since Marilyn Monroe was on every magazine cover and Elvis was scandalizing parents across the world. The post office still has the original brass fittings. The hardware store still sells nails by the pound from wooden barrels. Across Australia, scattered through the outback, where red dust roads stretch to horizons that shimmer in the heat, hidden in valley folds between mountain ranges, and sitting along forgotten highways that bypassed them decades ago, 10 towns remain locked in the 1950s. Not metaphorically, actually frozen. The same storefronts with peeling paint and faded signs. The same petrol pumps with glass tops and mechanical displays. The same weathered advertisements for products that no longer exist anywhere else on Earth. Today, you're about to see 10 places where time didn't just slow down. It stopped completely, and nobody bothered to restart it. Some of these towns chose preservation intentionally. Others got left behind when the highway moved, when the mine closed, when the railway bypassed them. But the result is the same. Walking through them feels like stepping through a tear in the fabric of time itself. The question isn't why they're still there. The question is what they tell us about the Australia we lost when we decided progress meant tearing down and starting over. Let's visit 10 Australian towns where 1955 never truly ended. Number 1. Maldon, Victoria, the town that said no to the future. In the heart of the Victorian goldfields, Maldon made a decision in 1966 that would define it forever. When the National Trust declared the entire town worthy of preservation, the locals could have fought it. They could have demanded the right to modernise, to replace the Victorian-era shopfronts with sleek new facades, to widen the streets for bigger cars. They didn't. Today, Maldon's main street looks exactly as it did when post-war prosperity was sweeping through Australia. The bakery on High Street still operates from a building constructed in 1859, its brick ovens heating the same stone floors, worn smooth by generations of bakers. The pharmacy displays vintage medicine bottles in the same wooden cabinets installed when Eisenhower was president. The barbershop features a pole that's been spinning since before television arrived in Australian homes. But Maldon isn't a museum. 300 families live here full-time. Kids walk to school past buildings their great-grandparents knew. The local pub serves beer under the same pressed metal ceiling that miners drank beneath a century ago. The town's refusal to modernise wasn't nostalgia, it was economics. Tourism now sustains what gold mining once built. Visitors arrive every weekend to see something increasingly rare in Australia, a town that didn't demolish its past to make room for its future. Number 2. Burra, South Australia, where the copper boom never really ended. Drive into Burra along the highway from Adelaide and you'll see the giant open-cut mine scar dominating the landscape before you see the town itself. The monster mine, locals called it. Between 1845 and 1877, this single hole in the ground produced 5% of the world's copper. When the copper ran out, Burra should have died like 100 other mining towns scattered across South Australia. But Burra had something special. Buildings so well constructed from local stone that demolishing them would cost more than maintaining them. The limestone blocks came from nearby quarries, cut by hand, assembled by craftsmen who expected their work to last centuries. So the town simply stopped growing and started preserving what it already had. Today, the main street of Burra features shopfronts that haven't been altered since the 1950s. The grocer's shop displays vintage tins of Milo and Vegemite in the front window. The hardware store sells the same tools from the same wooden bins installed when rationing ended after World War II. The town square centres around a fountain erected in 1938 that still works, still flows, still marks the town's heart. But the real-time capsule sits in Burra's residential areas. Entire streets of stone cottages remain unchanged since Cornish miners built them in the 1800s. Modern families live in them now, but step inside and you'll find original fireplaces, original floors, original windows looking out at landscapes that haven't changed since Australia was still learning what it meant to be a nation. Number 3. Hill End, New South Wales. The ghost town that refused to disappear. In 1872, Hill End was the richest town in New South Wales. The Holterman Nugget, the largest specimen of reef gold ever found, came from a shaft just outside town. A mass of gold-veined quartz weighing over 200 kilograms. At its peak, Hill End supported a population of 8,000 people, 2 newspapers, 28 pubs serving beer around the clock, and more than 100 shops competing for miners' wages. Then the gold ran out. Not slowly, not gradually. The richest veins were exhausted within a decade. By 1900, the population had collapsed to under 200. By 1950, most assumed Hill End would vanish completely. The grand hotels closed their doors. The shops emptied, stock sold at fire sale prices, or simply abandoned. Entire streets of houses stood vacant, weatherboard walls bleaching in the sun. But something strange happened. The buildings were too remote to salvage, too far from railways or decent roads to make demolition profitable. So they just stood there, weathering, aging, waiting. Today, Hill End exists in a permanent state of suspended decay. The Royal Hotel still stands on the main street, its 2-story veranda sagging but intact. The general store maintains its original wooden counters and shelving, installed sometime in the 1880s and never replaced. The post office operates from the same building it occupied when telegrams were cutting-edge technology. Only 70 people live in Hill End now, but every building tells a story of boom, bust, and the strange persistence of places that refuse to completely die. Walking through Hill End isn't like visiting the 1950s. It's like visiting every decade since the 1870s all at once, layered on top of each other, none quite erased. Number 4. Ravensthorpe, Western Australia, the town that time moved around. Ravensthorpe sits on the southern edge of Western Australia, far from any major city, connected to the world by a single highway that most Australians have never travelled. The town was founded in 1900, when copper and gold discoveries drew miners to this remote corner of the continent. The mines closed. The miners left. Ravensthorpe shrank, but didn't disappear. What saved the town was agriculture. Wheat farms spread across the surrounding countryside, and Ravensthorpe became a service hub for farmers who needed supplies, repairs, and a cold beer. But because the town was so isolated, and because replacing anything meant shipping it thousands of kilometres across the outback, nothing got replaced. Today, Ravensthorpe's main street features buildings from every era of the 20th century, but the dominant aesthetic remains firmly planted in the 1950s. The movie theatre still operates with a single screen and manual ticket booth. The bakery sells bread from ovens, installed in 1953. The general store stocks supplies in the same wire baskets that were state-of-the-art when Churchill was Prime Minister. But Ravensthorpe isn't frozen in amber. It's alive. Farmers still gather at the pub every Friday night. School kids still buy lollies at the corner shop. The difference is that all of this happens in buildings that look exactly as they did when their grandparents were doing the same things 70 years ago. Number 5. Coober, Pedy, South Australia, the underground town where surface time doesn't matter. Most Australian towns froze in time because they got left behind by progress, bypassed by highways, forgotten when mines closed. Coober, Pedy froze because its residents moved underground and stopped caring what century it was on the surface. 90% of Coober, Pedy's population lives in dugouts carved directly into hillsides to escape the searing heat of the outback, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius, and the sun bakes the red earth until it cracks. When you live in a hole in the ground, carved from sandstone with picks and dynamite, architectural trends don't matter much. The dugout you excavated in 1955 works just as well as one carved yesterday. The result is a town where surface buildings date from every era, since opal mining began in 1915, and none of them have been updated because nobody spends enough time in them to care about what year their facade represents. The main street of Coober, Pedy features weathered storefronts from the 1950s that look exactly as they did when air conditioning was still considered a luxury that few could afford. The service station pumps gas from machines that use rolling numbers instead of digital displays, mechanical counters clicking over with each litre dispensed. The town's underground churches, homes, and even the hotel maintain the same rough-hewn aesthetic they had when miners first discovered that living underground was the only way to survive the 120-degree summer days without dying of heat stroke. But Coober Pedy's time capsule quality goes deeper than aesthetics. The town operates on principles that haven't changed in 70 years. If you want opal, you grab a pick and start digging. If you want a house, you excavate one. If you need something the stores don't stock, you drive 5 hours to the nearest city, or you go without. Coober Pedy didn't choose to freeze in the 1950s. It just never found a reason to change. Number 6. Ross, Tasmania, where convict-era Australia meets mid-century preservation. Ross is the town that forgot it was supposed to modernise. Built in 1812 as a garrison and convict station, Ross developed along a single main street lined with sandstone buildings that were already old when Federation happened. By the 1950s, Ross was a quiet agricultural town with a declining population and no economic reason to update its infrastructure. The buildings were solid, built to last centuries. The streets worked. Why change? Today, Ross features a streetscape that blends Georgian architecture with mid-century additions so seamlessly that you can't always tell which era you're looking at. The bakery operates from a building constructed by convict labour in 1832, but the ovens inside date from 1954 and still produce the same bread recipes used when Eisenhower was in office. The pub has served beer continuously since 1839, from the same bar, under the same roof, to the same families for 7 generations. The Ross Female Factory, where convict women were imprisoned in the 1820s, sits at the edge of town in various states of preservation and ruin. But the town itself remains largely intact, protected by Tasmania's strict heritage laws and by locals who genuinely prefer living with history rather than erasing it. Walking through Ross feels like moving through multiple time periods at once. Convict-era buildings, post-war shopfronts, modern cars parked in front of structures that predate the internal combustion engine. It's a layered experience that most Australian towns demolished decades ago in the name of progress. If you're finding this journey through Frozen in Time fascinating, hit subscribe. I cover Australian hidden histories, forgotten towns, and places the modern world left behind every week. Now let's talk about the town that became world famous by refusing to change. Number 7. Silverton, New South Wales. The ghost town that Hollywood saved. Silverton's main street features exactly one pub, one general store, one art gallery, and one hotel. That's it. The entire functioning town core. The population peaked at 3,000 in the 1880s, when silver mining drew prospectors from across Australia. By 1900, the silver was gone, and so were the people, leaving nothing but sandstone and memories. But Silverton's buildings remained. Sandstone structures, designed to last centuries, sitting empty in the desert northwest of Broken Hill. Through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, the town slowly collapsed. By 1950, only a handful of families remained. Then something unexpected happened. Film crews discovered that Silverton looked exactly like the Old West. Mad Max 2 was filmed here. A town like Alice used Silverton's abandoned streetscapes. The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert featured the town's iconic hotel. Today, Silverton survives almost entirely on tourism, drawn by its film history and its frozen in time appearance. The Silverton Hotel serves beer in a building that hasn't been renovated since the 1950s. The general store sells vintage goods to tourists looking for authentic outback memorabilia. The streets remain unpaved red dirt, just as they were when miners walked them 140 years ago. Silverton isn't frozen in the 1950s specifically. It's frozen in every era, from the 1880s to the 1950s, all at once, creating a composite time capsule that film directors love because it looks simultaneously timeless and ancient. Number 8. Beechworth, Victoria. The gold rush town that became a preservation pioneer. Beechworth should have disappeared like hundreds of other gold rush towns across Victoria. When the gold ran out in the 1870s, populations collapsed overnight. Buildings were abandoned. Streets returned to dirt. Entire towns vanished. But Beechworth had something most mining towns lacked: a courthouse where Ned Kelly was tried in 1880, where Australia's most famous bushranger faced justice. That historical significance gave the town protection other places never received. By the 1950s, Beechworth had transformed from a boom town into a quiet agricultural community that happened to sit inside extraordinarily well-preserved 19th century buildings. When Australia began developing serious heritage protection laws in the 1960s, Beechworth was ready. Today, Beechworth's main street looks like a film set for a movie about 1950s Australia. The bakery has operated continuously since 1857. The pharmacy dispenses modern medicine from behind counters installed in 1868. The town hall, the post office, the bank, the hotel, all remain exactly as they were when Australians were still measuring distances in miles and temperatures in Fahrenheit. But Beechworth's real achievement is that it's still a functioning town. Families live here, businesses operate, kids attend school in buildings their great-great-grandparents knew. The preservation isn't performative, it's simply how Beechworth exists. Number 9. Roebourne, Western Australia. The town Progress forgot to demolish. Roebourne was Western Australia's first declared town, established in 1864 to support the pastoral industry in the Pilbara region. By the 1920s, Roebourne was the commercial centre of northwestern Australia. Then mining companies discovered iron ore in the surrounding hills. They built new ports, new towns, new infrastructure. Roebourne sat 30 kilometres inland, away from the coast, away from the railways, away from the new industrial boom transforming Western Australia. The town simply got skipped. Today, Roebourne exists as an accidental time capsule. The stone buildings along the main street date from the 1870s through the 1950s, and almost none of them have been significantly altered. The old jail, constructed in 1896 from local stone, still stands intact. The courthouse operates from a building erected in 1887. The church features stained glass windows installed before World War I. Only a few hundred people live in Roebourne now. Most work in nearby mining towns and choose to live here because the rent is cheap and the sense of history is overwhelming. Walking through Roebourne feels like walking through a place the modern world started to visit but then forgot to fully integrate. Number 10. Gulgong, New South Wales. The town on the $10 note that time couldn't erase. If you've ever held an old Australian $10 note, you've seen Gulgong. The main street, featured on the note's reverse side, photographed in the 1870s during the height of the gold rush, looks almost identical if you stand in the right spot and ignore the modern cars. Gulgong boomed during the New South Wales gold rush of the 1870s, growing from nothing to a town of 20,000 almost overnight. Henry Lawson, one of Australia's most famous writers and poets, spent his childhood here walking these streets, and he set many of his stories in these exact locations, immortalising the town in Australian literature. When the gold ran out, Gulgong became an agricultural town serving surrounding farms and cattle stations. But the buildings remained. More than 130 heritage-listed structures crowd Gulgong's compact town centre, creating one of the most concentrated collections of 19th and early 20th century architecture in Australia, a density of history rarely seen outside major cities. By the 1950s, Gulgong looked much as it had 70 years earlier, and the town made a collective decision to keep it that way, to preserve rather than demolish. The shopfronts maintain their Victorian-era facades with ornate pressed metal awnings and hand-painted signs. The pub serves beer in a building constructed in 1871 that's barely changed since the day it opened. The theatre still shows films on a screen, hung in a hall built in 1909, wooden seats worn smooth by a century of viewers. What makes Gulgong special is that preservation here isn't about tourism, it's about identity. The people of Gulgong see themselves as custodians of a particular slice of Australian history, and maintaining their streetscape is how they honour that responsibility. Today, Gulgong remains economically viable through a combination of agriculture, heritage tourism, and stubborn resistance to the idea that old things should be replaced just because they're old. So what does it mean that these 10 towns still exist? What does their survival tell us about Australia and the choices we've made about our built heritage? In a country that demolished most of its architectural heritage between 1950 and 1980, Tearing down Victorian-era buildings to make room for concrete brutalism, and then tearing that down for glass and steel, these places stand as accidental monuments to the Australia that was, to decisions made differently. They show us what our cities might have looked like if we hadn't torn down every building over 50 years old to make room for parking lots and shopping centres. They're living evidence of a different approach to time, to history, to the question of what we owe the past. But they also show us something else, something perhaps more important. They show us that time isn't linear in the way we often assume, that the past doesn't disappear just because we build over it or ignore it, that sometimes the most radical act, the most rebellious choice, is simply refusing to change when everyone around you is demolishing everything and starting over. These towns aren't perfect preservation specimens under glass in museums. They struggle with declining populations as young people leave for cities with more opportunities and better jobs. They wrestle with aging infrastructure that's expensive to maintain and impossible to replace with modern equivalents. They face the economic challenges of existing in a country that rewards growth and development over preservation and continuity. But they survive. They persist. They adapt without fundamentally changing. They refuse to surrender to the myth that newer is always better, that progress requires destroying what came before. If you found this journey through frozen in time worth taking, through 10 Australian towns where the clock stopped, drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you visited any of these towns? Do you think Australia should have preserved more of its past? Or are these 10 towns enough? Thanks much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.